Hello, today we'll talk about modern poetry. Students, modern poetry owes its importance, its significance, and its valuable place in the history of English poetry to the uh, innovative spirits of the great literary artists like Ezra Pound, T.S. Eliot, W.B. Yeats, W.H. Auden, and many more. So today, before talking about the salient features of modern poetry or the famous modern poets, let's try to understand the context where this modern poetry and modern poets are located. So first we will begin with an understanding of the term modern and modernism in the historical time frame. Students, in the world history, modern age is recorded as a complex and complicated phase. Why it is so? Because it was the time when First World War took place. Then it was the time when the whole world faced the economic depression. Then Second World War and growing industrialization and urbanization. So in this way, this was the time when wars, economic depression, industrialization and urbanization changed the face of human society, changed the face of world history. And this was the time from 1895 to 1945. And this very period in the world history is recorded as the age of interrogation and anxiety because the scientific discoveries, changing social, political and economic conditions due to war and industrialization have shaken faith in the authority of church and religion. So in this way, the whole social structure had undergone a complete metamorphosis. Now, the question arises that why that very particular phase of 20th century is called modern, because generally if we look at the meaning of the term modern, we find that it means current or contemporary, and in terms of being current or contemporary, every age is modern, every age is contemporary when it is in vogue. But it is for the first time in the 20th century that modernism found its location in intellectual corridors in terms of the interrogating, in terms of questioning the traditional way of life. And if we look at modernism in terms of literary history, we find that it is a literary movement broadly covering the period of the last decade of the 19th century to the beginning of the Second World War, as it is mentioned in the previous slide, that it was the time from 1895 to 1945. And now that's modernism in literature or in the history of English literature is a broad term covering varied schools of literature, art and thought and several literary movements. In brief, we can say that modernism was not a something which was just based on one thought or one aim or one point. It was multifold and it was just an umbrella for the several literary movements like imagism, expressionism, symbolism and surrealism. We'll talk all these isms later on because these very isms were very popular in terms of the mode of expression in the literary circles of that very time. Now the modernist literature, how it is modern, because the new themes and new ideas were introduced into the literature of this very period. Then there were the new modes of expressions, as it is mentioned earlier, that imagism and expressionism and symbolism and surrealism, they just changed the mode of expression. Then the literary artists made experiments in the form and style also. Now we'll talk about the salient features of modern poetry. Students, modern poetry is a curious mixture of traditional and experimental. It's a curious mixture of the old and the new. Something from the Victorian tradition has been followed, but with the changes in the social structure, with the two world wars, so many changes have just reflected in the contemporary literature also, and the style of the literary artists also. And the modern poetry, just because of the complexity of the time, just because of the complexity of the life during the period, it is complex and many-sided in terms of its subject matter. And the poets of modern poets, I should say, they just touched upon every object which is existing under this universe. They were not limited only to the some fixed themes or the fixed subjects. Secondly, this modern poetry reflects the sense of alienation, disillusionment which was there just because of the wars and the economic depression. Now in brief we can say, in terms of subject matter, in terms of the portrayal or the reflection of the sense of disillusionment, the first half of the 20th century there was a change in English poetic outlook. Now the poet was no longer a singer of beautiful dreams and experiences. The poet had to express the chaos, changing scenario of life and society around him, that how the two world wars have just changed the face of the world, how the growing urbanization has brought dirt and squalor with it, which has just spoiled the healthy way of living. So all these questions regarding the healthy or beautiful existence in the society just reflected in the poetry of the age. In brief, we can say that in modern poetry, there is a revolt against tradition. There is a revolutionary extension in terms of subject matter. The modern poets, they used the unconventional and uncommon themes. They just touched upon, they wrote upon those very themes which were just unnoticed earlier, like trams, trains, locomotives, and aeroplanes. No doubt, nature, patriotism, and love of homeland were also added to their poetry. They were also there in their poetry, but they revolted against the traditional themes. And this is no doubt, this is a poetry of experiment also. The poets experimented in terms of theme, subject, and also style and form that we will discuss in the later. Then this is the poetry of disillusionment, as we have just seen in the previous slide, that how the wars and the growing industrialization changed the whole social setup, and the losses and the disadvantages just make the disillusionment a prevalent tendency of the society. Then in this poetry, in the modern poetry, there is great influence of music and other fine arts also. And as far as the experimentation or change in the form and style of modern poetry is concerned, modern poetry, there is the experimentation in the new modes of expression, and as it was mentioned in the very second slide, that there was modernism is a collection of so many isms. Imagism is there. So how imagism has changed the mode of expression? Imagist way of presenting concrete images to convey ideas and experiences and feelings, and this gift of imagism was given to modern poetry by French symbolist Ezra Pound. Then the symbolist way of presenting ideas in terms of deeply significant symbols. Then there was expressionistic way of probing deep into the psyche. Lastly, the surrealist way of using unnatural and irrational juxtapositions, exciting the language of unconscious. Just in brief, we can say that the modern poets experimented a lot in terms of form and style, and they just moved away from the traditional form of the poetry. In this way, modern poetry also holds true to the maxim that literature is the mirror of society. The modern poets, they just followed or mirrored the spirit of revolt, the spirit of questioning, the spirit of anxiety and disillusionment in their writings. They just moved away from the traditional themes, they moved away from the traditional style, the traditional diction, they used the colloquial style, the slang words in their poems. And as far as the famous modern poets are concerned, they are Rudyard Kipling. Students, all of you must be familiar with the Jungle Book, the character of Mowgli. Then there is Robert Bridges' The Testament of Beauty. W.B. Yeats with his Second Coming and the Tar. The poem Second Coming is prescribed for your syllabus also. And T.S. Eliot. He is considered to be the representative poets of the 20th century, and his poem Wasteland, it is a true picture or true portrayal of the dejection, ambiguity and chaos of the modern society. Then there is The Hollow Man, and one other important poem is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It's there prescribed for your syllabus also. Some other modern poets are Cecil D. Lewis, W.H. Auden, Stephen Spander. So student, this is all in brief about modern poetry and modern poets. Thank you.